Welcome back, everyone, to the Great Awakening podcast. I am your host, Jennifer Longmore, as you know, and I'm excited to introduce you to my friend and colleague today, Lorrie Richins. You are in for a real treat because Lorrie has a wealth of experience and knowledge that we get to benefit from today. She's a personal and family empowerment coach, energy healing facilitator, body language advisor, and certified emotion code and NLP practitioner. She has successfully overcome past physical and emotional trauma and now empowers others to do the same. Her business, which is called Whole Family Mentoring, focuses on helping families heal and feel whole again. And she shares positive family messages during the Family First segment each week on the Allison H. Larson Spotlight radio show, and is the up and coming author of the book Fortified: 10 Effective Strategies to Fortify Our Families. She's been featured in several online magazines and all kinds of media, actually, Lorrie. And she's very passionate about preserving our individual freedoms and was recently a candidate for the Idaho State Representative. She considers her marriage of 36 years and being the mother of 7 children and grandmother of 11 her greatest joy and accomplishment. So welcome to the show, Lorrie.
So glad to be with you again, Jennifer.
We were talking privately, and you and I met at an event, which was incidentally the last trip that each of us took before we went into 15 days to flatten the curve. And here we are now, however many days later. I think I read online today, it was something like it's been 511 days or something, someone said, to the day that we're recording this. But here we were going to this event, not knowing what was going to happen, and the rest is history. So thank you for being here. And we're going to dive into a lot of stuff today, but we have so much to cover. And I definitely would love to start with your perspective on how do we navigate these waters that we're in, I guess you could say. I mentioned to you that my husband and I are on very different pages. For people that listen to the show regularly, they know that my husband believes this is just a virus that's going to pass. If we just do what the government says, then everything will go back to normal. And people like me are the ones that are holding up the process. And then, of course, there's people like me that are saying, hi, this isn't about a virus. Can we take a look at some other things? But I have so many clients that are having, I'll say, at least tension, if not full on drama in their families, either with their marriages or with their extended family, people breaching boundaries, taking children for vaccines without parental permission, even though they know the parents don't want their children to have it, pressuring one parent or the other to get it, and bombarding them with family intervention meetings, threatening divorce, and all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And so how do we deal with that?
One really effective conversation that I had with my daughter-in-law not long ago, I think is going to benefit the listeners today. She is somebody I highly respect and somebody who's taken a different perspective than I have on some of the events transpiring politically and also with the virus and so forth. And we don't always agree on the final I guess, decision that either of us make. But one thing that I have learned is really important is to recognize something that the two of us concluded that I think is accurate for so many families and individuals. And it was simply this: her resources and the information that she's gaining insight from is often different than the resources that I have. And so I've learned not to blame people for the conclusions that they're making, because a lot of times it's just the foundation is different as far as us coming to the wise decisions that each of us feel that we're making. Your husband feels he's being wise, you feel like you're being wise, and I base my business on wisdom. And the reality is we've all had different experiences in our lives. And you and I were talking earlier about the fact that I come from a background with a lot of trauma and family betrayal. I come from medical betrayal. I come from a history where it allows my brain to actually accept the fact that there could be a questionable agenda out there. And many people haven't had those experiences. And so it's difficult for them to perceive that it could be on a very personal or large scale, not only deception, but intention for harm. And even people who are causing harm are not necessarily doing it intentionally. For some of those individuals, they honestly are doing the best that they feel they can under these dire circumstances. And so within our family ranks, when we are individually trying to come to terms with the differing opinions, I've learned to respect what my children are choosing to do. Some of them have chosen to have the vaccinations, and some of us have not. And the most important, I think, outcome is preserving those family relationships, regardless of what the differing approaches are, and recognizing the higher gift that we have, and that's one another. And I allow my family to accept the consequences of their decisions, and they know that I'm willing to accept the consequences of mine as well. But when you start breaking down the fabric of society, which is the family unit, we're going to have a lot more problems than just the virus.
Oh, for sure. And I'm so glad you said that. It is true, right? Like you and I have had different experiences. You know this about me that I worked in forensics for years. So I was innocent. I was 22, 23 years old going out and doing investigations and quickly learned that what I had been taught about trust your teacher, trust your police officer,
Mhm.
trust your politician, trust all of these authority figures. While there are, of course, great people in every industry, when you're out investigating the people that are supposed to be protecting you and protecting children,
Mhm.
it's very easy to see that maybe the world isn't, as pure and wholesome as your inner child mind wants to believe, as far as, who you can go to, who's a safe person, so to speak, right? And and then on top of that, yeah, so that informs the information that's even going to come on our radar.
Exactly. And uh, part of my story that when I was 40 years old, my brain released the extent of some of the most atrocious events that had happened in my childhood that I completely blocked. And one of the conclusions that I've come to is that your brain will open up and allow you to receive information when it's ready. And it took until I was 40 years old in order for me to even cognitively even be able to handle the information that I suddenly had to process. And so I use this term that what I survived as a child nearly killed me as an adult, when I had to come to the reality of what my life had been, what my body had endured, what my mind had suffered. And then I had to put all those fractured pieces back together and try and make sense of this world when people that you trust are your betrayers, when people that are supposed to protect you are your perpetrators. It really does take time to be able to survive that kind of thinking. And there's a lot of people in the world that just can't go there. I couldn't go there for a long time. And so, again, I have compassion on those individuals who um, don't want to accept that that's possible. And I know what the path was like for me. It was difficult. But I had mentioned earlier to you about this book that I have that I really love, and it's called The Survivors Club. And basically, it's a compilation of people's life experiences, those who've been able to survive really difficult situations, either a drowning or a plane crash or a train that, gets in a terrible collision, something along those lines. And so this research was done regarding the general population. Who are the ones who survive? Who are the ones that follow? And who are the ones that become dangerous when there's crisis? And they found statistically that it's a 10-80-10 quotient, and 10% of the population is going to collapse. In fact, they become dangerous because, say there's a drowning, taking place in the water and they're in trouble, they'll take you down with them. Like, they can't keep their senses together. Instead of being an asset to help in that dire situation, they'll grab onto you and pull you down. They're just not going to be thinking very clearly. And then 80% of the population tends to need somebody to tell them what they need to do. And then 10%, the top 10 tier, are the ones who can keep their mindsets. They can manage their emotions. They can see Oftentimes, information, put together that information in advance and know that something is happening, or feel something that is awry, and then they know to act, to move. And I consider myself one of the 10%, and that's part of the work that I do. I turn wounded people into warriors so that they don't feel like they always have to be told what to do in certain situations, that they'll be able to cognitively think clearly and then make wise decisions that won't be detrimental to the rest of the family or to the population.
Mm. So when people are being told and that I'm glad you gave that reference because it does sound interesting, and it also gives hope because
Mm.
if if we can unlearn stuff and then learn how to be more resilient and more resourceful, right, and move that needle, then that's great. With that 80%, it sounds like that other 10% is kind of, that's probably going to be diminishing returns by focusing
Mhm.
energy on people that just they don't have the capacity. But for the 80% that do potentially have the capacity to shift, then we can shift those. So let's talk about, people when personal choices aren't being respected in the family,
Mhm.
where someone's being told, unless you bend to my will and you do what I want you to do, I'm leaving you, or you're going to need to
Mm.
leave, or you're not welcome to come here unless you've had a medical procedure, or any of those kind of things that we're hearing. Do you have any tangible sayings or, I don't know, mechanisms, things in your toolkit that people can pull out and maybe borrow for themselves when people come at them in that way?
Well, one of the first effective tools to diffuse that kind of contention is to find common ground. And like I said, as I was visiting with my daughter in law, the common ground was we recognized that both of us were doing our research, both of us were striving to do the right thing. And for us to identify that we were simply listening to resources that we trusted on a different level helped us to understand that it wasn't about looking at the other person as being ignorant or being sheeple. That's a term that is often being used. There's a lot of manipulation that's happening in society by calling people names, by labeling them. Labels have a lot of power. So you will see names being called increasingly over the years. I'm sure that's going to happen because people don't like to be labeled. And so they want to get out from underneath that kind of blanket assessment. And so we have to discipline ourselves to not be attacking each other in those kinds of ways that cause more and more defensiveness to come up. And one thing that is certainly being discussed now is that the people who wanted to have, say, the vaccination, have already decided to do that. And so now people are left with the fact that once that decision is made and you have a certain number of people in the population who are choosing not to do that, then there's a lot of elevating of the coercive tactics that are now taking place. And one of the things that I teach my clients is called the scale. And so I want to talk about what this means. So when you have a scale and you have one side, a scale of justice, and when you have one side that changes and shifts, inevitably the other side is going to be affected. That's what's happening in society right now. You're having the scale shift, and then everyone is trying to decide, what do we do with this new paradigm? And so I'm going to talk about the four behaviors that people will typically engage in when they're being acted upon. So if you make a decision in your relationship with your husband, and say you're having it's been a dysfunctional relationship. I'm just using this as an example. And you suddenly start to develop some boundaries and some insight and some criteria that you expect him to live by. Four things will typically end up happening. The law of the scale is L. A person could leave. They could just decide the relationship isn't worth it. I really don't want to have to engage in this any longer. It's taking too much energy. They don't see a favorable outcome, so they just leave. The E, or excuse me, the A stands for attack. and somebody might want to attack in return to get that person to comply. The attack could come from labeling, it could come from vocal attacks, it could come from physical attacks. There's all kinds of ways that you can attack another person in order to get them to surrender, to comply. The W stands for wait and or wonder, wait or wonder, where they're just not quite sure if that person's going to hold the line. This new version of that individual is kind of being tested. So the other spouse might just say, "Oh, I'm going to wait and see how this all turns out." And then the S is that the relationship is so important that they're willing to stay no matter what. And in family situations, it's not just the virus that's causing a lot of these decisions to be made as far as, the category of the LAWS. It's literally been happening, for eons, and the virus is just bringing it more to the surface. So we're seeing this in families. Some are choosing to leave, some are attacking, some are waiting, and some are just saying, I'm sticking with it, no matter what the agreement is as far as how to approach what's happening in society. They love each other enough that they're willing to stay committed to it. So when people understand human behavior, like the 10-80-10 rule, I recognize 80% of the individuals really are going to need someone else to tell them what to do. And there might be 40% of that who decide to be cautious about it. And the other 40% that might decide to just, submit to whatever the government's asking them to do. When you understand human nature, it kind of gets you out of the angry position, and it helps you to understand that this is just a normal response to what happens all over the world, and you have to decide what part of that dynamic you're going to be in. Are you going to be in the 10%, the 80%, the bottom 10? Are you going to leave? Are you going to attack, wait, or are you going to stay? Just a lot of important decisions we're all having to make, and hopefully we're doing it well. You and I are trying to do it in a pragmatic, wise way where we can be sovereign without submitting, but we can also be respectful.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you shared that because we're all choosing. One of the many things I've learned through this is that even if it doesn't seem to us like people are choosing, we are all choosing,
Mm.
and it doesn't have to make sense to us, right? And in my situation, I know my husband has said to me, you've changed, and I'm just waiting patiently for you to become
Ah,
the woman that I married. And I'm like, I'm actually the same person. I
mm,
wasn't running out and getting a vaccine before. Uh, you've never seen me. You've only seen me eat a raw food diet, like a vegan diet, and go for all kinds of healthcare appointments and all kinds of things, right? Meaning like natural health. There's nothing about how I live my life that would suggest that I was going to do that. That's not to say that people who get it don't. But he's waiting patiently, and I think I probably was too. I was holding out that maybe he would change his mind, and now we're both choosing to stay because the love is greater. Plus, you and I both have the wisdom, and all of you listening, that this is part of the tactic. So if anything, it gives me fuel to work harder on my relationship and say, okay, how can I find a workaround? Because to your point of what you were sharing before, we're all actually on the same page. We just have a different belief about how to get there. Like, for example, my husband believes that I could die from this
mm,
virus, and I do not believe. I mean, I could, but I'm not gonna. When I'm dead, I'm not gonna have regrets because I'm not gonna know that. You know what I mean? Like I will be gone. But that's my concern, right? And just as he believes that health is through vaccines, I believe health is through fortifying my immune system, for example. I'm just using me as an example
mm,
because I started to see that in fact a lot of us had the same end goal, or we had the same desire. We just had a different perspective on how to get there. And so it's figuring out how do we navigate those conversations. Now, let's say in the case where someone is so, let's say an extended family member is coming in and sneaking someone's child to go and get it, even though they know the
mm,
parents have said no and the parents have specifically told everyone no. In those kind of situations where there's again, they're probably thinking they're doing good by doing it and being an advocate and all those kind of things. How do people navigate those more contentious, like boundary breaching sort of situations?
Well, I would need more details, of course, regarding the foundation of really why he would be, that
Mm,
person would be so mistrusting to go in and take that child away. And so, again, um, that one is a very difficult one. I haven't had to face that uh, myself personally, but I do recognize that um, one thing that uh, you and I were talking about a movie recently called Greenland, and I was sharing with you that um, this comet in this movie, this comet was coming from the sky, and the government knew in advance that it was going to ultimately strike the world, and there was going to be, a huge catastrophe. And so they were selecting certain populations that were going to be preserved to live through it. And there was just a lot of interesting. Dynamics that you end up seeing regarding who's selected to live, who's selected to not, be provided with the resources they need in order to survive, and human nature, what they're willing to do under those dire circumstances to save themselves, to save other family members. Um, it really is something that actually I've been seeing a bit of late in society happening. And I live in a small town. I live in a small 5,000 population town. We're joined by a couple other small communities as well, but we're about 45 minutes from Boise. And we had a little boy about a week ago that has disappeared, and he's like 5 years old. And so um, the whole community has been impacted by this, and search parties and things have been going out. And so this is something new to our community too. We've never had anything like this happen, and we're seeing the best of mankind, and we're seeing the worst of mankind. And the the message that I want to get out is it's going to be very important that we keep our wits about us and be as sensible as possible in stressful situations, because we are going to see people act more irrationally, and we're going to see more divisiveness. And we need to be a voice of reason, and we need to be a voice of
mm,
clarity and comfort also. I had a client whose son, who was 5, drowned in a pool in this last week as well. And I ended up having a conversation with her, and she talked about freezing when her little boy was pulled out from the bottom of the neighbor's pool. There were people all around who just did not see what had happened. And finally, somebody spotted him lifeless at the bottom of the pool and pulled him out. And she absolutely froze. And one way that I help my clients is I do a backdoor approach to a front door problem. So we've got a lot of front door problems right now, and there's a lot of resistance. People aren't wanting to hear about options. Their mind has been made up. So she's been dealing with the physical trauma and the emotional and spiritual trauma of what happened that day. And so as I visited with her, I took a backdoor approach by just saying, when my son was 18 months old, he jumped on the back of a boxer dog that was a friend of ours, pet, and the dog was older and not very patient, and ended up flipping my son over and mauled him all over his face. And so he had to be rushed to the ER and sewn up his face. His nose was completely severed and almost completely through his lip, and he had 42 stitches in his face, and a plastic surgeon had to repair all of that. And I said, when we got him home from the hospital, we brought him back to the dog. The dog was, still nearby. And it really wasn't the dog's fault. It was an age factor. The dog was laying out in the sun, totally relaxed. And then suddenly this, little boy jumps on him. And the dog shouldn't have attacked to to biting like that, but probably didn't even know what had happened to it. So it was self defense. And so we brought Brandon back to the dog, and they had a brief encounter, and I was very calm during that exchange. And to this day, my son is around animals, and he's just fine. And so I told these stories, and I told a couple other stories, and I helped this person to just kind of consider a new option. So I got a call yesterday and found out that she's doing really, really well. She's gone back to the pool. She had her son go back in the water. She put goggles on her own face and then put her head in the water so she could see what it looked like, under the water in to where she could see the base of the pool. So she just reprinted her brain, is what she did. And so we need to help people in ways like that, backdoor approaches where we're not so combative with each other. And I was just assuring her, I said, I've been through situations like this. These are the stages emotionally you're probably going to go through. Know that you'll get to the other side, so that she wasn't alarmed by these emotional swings that she might be in, or the depths of despair she might go in, and she's just handling life really, really well, as is that little boy. So those of us who can maintain that top 10% tier of being very rational, just, cognitively helping people to understand what other options they have. And we shouldn't get into the space of needing to force someone to see our perspective. Like I could have told her, you need to take that boy back to the pool. Well, that's not my little boy. She knows her son better than I do. She has the stewardship, she has the insight, she has the inspiration for her son that I don't have. So I simply told her stories that would allow her brain to calm down. And then she decided for herself what she was going to do. And the outcome has been really, really good.
That's incredible. It's just getting me to think too. That this show is designed to help people who are awake to the agenda and want to restore hope and faith and so on. And I typically speak to that 10%. And uh, and I prefer to work with people that are leading themselves. But I'm realizing in you saying this that I'm going to spend some time figuring out what are the backdoor ways that I can support the people that are awake but don't, are still waiting for it, they're waiting for someone to tell them what to do. So whoever that person is happens to be, that's maybe going to be the voice that they listen to. I don't mean it needs to be me, but just that we were probably sent here, honestly, to be supporting that 80%.
Yes, and the reality is there's a lot of life experiences that have been necessary in putting ourselves into that, or allowing ourselves to be in that top 10%. And we also have to recognize that as we experience life's journey, that there are times when we're going to be in the 80%, and depending on the situation. And so I'm thankful that there are times when I'm in that 80% and I need somebody to guide me, that I know who I can look to trust. And then, potentially we could switch places. So I actually have a personal physician, a personal practitioner that some months ago, she ended up calling me, and it was early in the morning, and she's never utilized my services ever as a life coach. She's somebody that I have utilized, but she was really struggling with all of the demands that were now being forced upon her with what's happening with COVID, and now having to adjust. There were a lot of appointments made, via internet. She wasn't having the hands-on. She had to do a lot more computer work, a lot more paperwork. It was just very taxing for her. And she wasn't holding up very well. And I loved the humility that she had. And she said, I don't really even know what you do. I just had this feeling that I needed to call you. And then I put my hat on as being the life coach and the friend and the voice of reason in that situation. And even though I've used her medically on many occasions, which have been very helpful with her knowledge, in that case, she was now the 80%. She needed me to be in the 10% role, and for me to help her to know how to navigate through this new season and this new experience she was having. And other times I'm the 80% and she's my guide. So we're going to have to be as temperate as possible, and also recognize that in that top 10, you're going to have people who don't all agree. Like people who
Mhm.
have that type A capacity, just step up and, take charge, are going to be fierce on both sides of the spectrum. And one thing that I've realized is the most effective people are going to be the ones who don't have to submit to coercive tactics. They can just speak truth in a dignified manner. And the people who need to hear that, something will happen within them. And it's usually a lessening of the combative nature. And it's more of a surrender to, oh, I can relax now. And I know that I need to consider this as another possibility.
Mhm. I love that you shared that, and I think that's probably in part, because I've noticed even within our larger community, I'll say the people that are awake, that we all at least know that there's a bigger agenda and there's other things happening, but there's still division within it because some people think that this person is the person to follow and they're just holding the ultimate truth. And then there's others
Mhm.
that are like, why are you following that person? That person's a deceiver, and and on and on and on, right? And so I think we're all on the same page as far as, okay, we know that we're in the middle of this, but where we're tripping over ourselves is who we're backing, so to speak, right? So
Mhm.
and maybe that lends nicely to the work that you're doing, because I know that you're helping people understand their individual freedoms and restoring their knowledge of, you know, um, uh, like how America was founded and
Mhm.
various things like that, and how to advocate for themselves. So, can you walk us through a little bit of the work that you're doing with that project that you're working on?
Yeah, so 3 years ago when I ran for state representative, it was not a decision that I had made previously. It was actually something that was presented to me just days before the deadline was over. A previous senator and his wife had approached me and asked me if I would consider running. And there was some concern about the value system of the person who was currently holding that position. So I really had to pray and ponder about whether that was something I even wanted to engage in. I supported our history. I'm an advocate of the Constitution. I was trained in the Constitution myself by somebody that I highly admire. And so I had an important decision to make. Do you answer the call when you don't really feel ready? Do you engage when you feel incompetent? And I just didn't have enough time to prepare. But I've learned that the Lord really doesn't always care about the length of time you've prepared, because He'll teach you if you just say yes. So after I said yes and started that quest, you and I talked a bit before. I was having a pretty serious health condition that I was dealing with that was causing me to be shaky and weak, and I was losing weight, and my memory was having some trouble. It just was not a good time to be engaged in such a serious responsibility. But the message that I needed to deliver got through. And one day, I'm actually in my living room right now, and there's that chair right over there I was sitting in um, during the time that I was in this campaign process. I was taking kind of an afternoon nap, and I had this spiritual download. And what I was told was that the family is the greatest governing body on the earth. And this understanding was given to me that no matter what is happening politically and whatever position people happen to be in, that really the foundation of who we become later in the world as contributors and what our belief systems are start in the family. And so I knew that I needed to be an advocate for not only the family here on earth, but that we have a Father in heaven who guides and is involved in our lives as well. So faith and family were my focus, and freedom. And so with that, I want to really impress upon people's minds that regardless of what happens on a larger scale in the world, the family unit is so critical to our survival. If we break down in the family unit within the home, then we are so much more vulnerable to what happens in society. We become more dependent on social programs. We become more dependent on I have a client who's been married twice, and it didn't work out very well. And we had a time where she was recently talking to me about someone that she's considering coming into her life, who already has made it clear that he's not maybe the best person in her life. And yet, she's wondering about that possibility because she's been jaded before, and she's maybe wondering if there is that person out there who's going to be of the standard, of the caliber that she feels she deserves. And I was glad to be a reminder to help her to really see who she is as an individual and how exceptional she is. And it's okay to be sovereign. It's okay to be alone for a period of time in your belief system and in your personal life until you find that match who's going to end up, completing your package. But being sovereign alone, we've got to become less dependent, less needy. I often ask my clients, what's your needy level? Because if you're needy for money, if you're needy for companionship, if you're needy for people to agree with you, if you're needy for the masses, the numbers, to for you to feel like you belong, and you're complying with the numbers, then you are going to be useless as far as making a difference if you are, because you're going to be compromised. And we've got to be willing to stand alone and to take a loss financially or take a loss in other areas of our lives, and stick to our value system. There are a lot of people compromising that because they want to belong, or they want to feel like they are complying with somebody that, if they're attacking you, again, going down that LAWS, what if they're threatening to leave, or what if they're going to attack you? They just want to avoid that. So they're complying. So now is a time for us to not be needy. And for a time, I just want to share one other quick lesson that I learned as a mother. I'm a mother of 7, and when one of, it was either baby 6 or 7, was pretty sick. Usually, I understand the purpose of fevers. Fevers elevate the body temperature in order to fight virus and bacteria. So a lot of people, mothers, feel like getting rid of the fever is actually healing the child. And I have learned that it's important to let fevers run their course as much as possible. The higher the fever, the greater indication that the fever is serving a purpose. And so, unless it's at nighttime when my children were small, I rarely ended up giving them something to reduce the fever. I just supported the body. And if the fever reduced, I knew that the body was recovering better. So, fevers are an indication of giving you important information. So, it happened to be on a weekend when my child's fever was getting kind of high, and I knew that he or she needed some sleep. And so I asked my husband, we didn't have any like ibuprofen or Tylenol or anything for a child in the home at that time. I rarely ever used it. And so he went to the store and came back with this orange liquid. And I'm not going to say what it was. I don't even remember what it was. But this gut feeling inside me told me, do not give this to my child. But at the time, I didn't really have any other options. And so I said a prayer and I said, Heavenly Father, if this is not good for my child, if this is going to harm my child for whatever reason, just please help my, baby just spit it up. My child spit it up. And sure enough, I gave the dose, and immediately my little one, threw it up. And then I knew that it was going to be a long night, but I stayed the course and I took care of my child with other means. So the point is, with all of these decisions that are being made with the virus, or whatever else is happening, regardless if it's the masks or stay home, whatever it happens to be, I have an experience where 99% of the population, their child would have done fine taking that yellow liquid to reduce the fever. But my gut told me that that common across the counter product was not going to be good for my child. And so I did what I could do, only, what I could do. And my child was able to throw it up. But the vaccine, you cannot do that. You cannot rid your body, like the throwing up process of the vaccine once it's injected into your system. So that's why I hope people will respect my personal decision, that if my gut tells me this isn't okay, I've had enough experiences to learn to trust myself. And I encouraged my clients too. I give them the platform where they can kind of assess going through the head, then through the heart, and into the gut to make decisions for themselves. I don't tell them what to do. I just help them to get to the foundational place where they can be secure in the decision that they make.
Hmm. That's incredible. So, so when you ran for this position, and then it ended up not, you ended up not becoming the
Mm.
senator, right? Which it sounds like maybe even your higher knowing sort of created a situation where maybe it would have prevented you from getting into that situation. I know now that you're helping people understand their individual freedoms and so on. And one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the show was because you and I had been talking privately about the fact that we need to move beyond sharing information at this point, meaning constantly spreading memes and here's another report from the CDC, or here, like there's sort of regurgitation of the same information, and help people actually start to lead themselves and advocate. So I know you're hosting regular meetings for people to come together and understand their rights and so on. Can you walk us through a little bit of what you do in that group?
Sure. Actually, I ran for state representative, not senator. And
Oh,
the
okay.
the beautiful thing about that is I actually ran against a two-time incumbent, and I still got 41% of the vote, which is a very difficult thing to run against an experienced uh, person who's been in office and had a lot more to draw upon. But I realized that my purpose in engaging really wasn't about winning. It was about discovering what my message needed to be, and now I deliver it on stages and in magazines and obviously through Facebook. But yes, I do an America Matters Zoom class every Sunday at 7 o'clock. And interestingly enough, it's again I want to give two aspects to this story. One day I was out in my garden. It was last year, I think, and I was in the beet row. We have some beautiful beets that we've grown, and they're just really healthy for you. And I was weeding a little. I was picking some of the produce as well, and I was processing a lot of the things that had happened in my childhood, and a lot of the things that were happening in the world. And I was just aware of there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of deception, there's a lot of brutality that takes place, in organizations that are supposed to be, blessing people. It can actually become very burdensome to them. And so I was in the garden just reflecting about people being a problem, I guess, and in whatever arena. And I was humbled. I was actually chastised a bit in my garden. And I was told that I was part of the problem as well. And it was one of those moments where I really had to reflect and be aware that God's higher knowing was something that I needed to receive, even though it was going to sting a little bit. And it wasn't a chastisement as in you should be doing more. It was a chastisement of I need to teach you something right now so that you recognize that you can be doing more, and it's time. So what I recognized was if the adversary, and I believe there is an adversary, if an adversary can influence people to harm children, then the amount of effort it takes to heal as an adult from the trauma experienced as a child is tremendous. And it often paralyzes the parent, the adult, from being able to really make a difference. Because, like that mother who pulled their child out of the water and was paralyzed on the side of the pool, I was paralyzed for a period of time in my life. In fact, I set a date at one point to take my own life when I was forced to reckon with the truth of all the trauma that had happened. And thankfully that date came and went, and I've never been to that place since. But the point that I'm making is it was like the Lord was helping me to see that, if anyone can be effective in helping people to deal with their trauma, it's someone like me who's lived it. If anyone can help open the eyes of other people regarding what's possible, like I'm rarely shocked regarding people's life experiences because I've probably had that or worse in my own life. And so I am a powerful catalyst for people to move from wounded to warrior. And I had been surviving for so long and focusing on just my immediate family and creating a healthy family dynamic. That was a major mission. Very proud of that. I had 7 children raised in a healthy home environment. They are now productive members of society. I've got 11 grandchildren being raised in good homes. I did a mighty work, as do all of us who stop that kind of trauma and then allow the next generation to be happy and healthy. But God was letting me know that I had more that I could do, and that I needed to take the knowledge that I had, the wisdom that I had, and the witness, basically, that people can endure and overcome tremendous obstacles and actually be more effective on the other side. Like the further back an arrow is pulled, the further the arrow flies. Well, I was pulled back pretty severely in my life, and I'm flying. And the important aspect too is there are hunters in this world and there are fishermen, and fishermen gather with nets, a lot of fish at the same time. And then there are hunters who really impact the few. But if they can find that one individual or two or three or whatever that happens to be, they can go on and really affect the masses. And I've found that God has placed me more in a role of being a hunter in many respects. And there are certain individuals who hear my voice and they know that I am a match for them, and they step toward me. And then I know what to do to support them so that they can move from that wounded to warrior person. And then they become that 10%. So I'm not so worried about the masses. I'm worried about the individuals who recognize, I'm not worried about them, but I want to be that resource for the individual who can then have a voice, who can see things clearly, who can speak truth, but not degrade, not demean, not need to tackle people. I want to enlighten them. I want to help them to get the wisdom that they need to be effective resources for truth. And so my approach isn't about abrasiveness, it's about speaking truth with clarity in a way that's very digestible. It makes sense to people, and then they'll understand it and be wanting to carry the message even one step further.
Mhm. So if people want to join in on that meeting on Sundays at 7, how would they get in touch with you for that?
Yeah, they can go to my Facebook page. They can go to wholefamilymentoring.com, and then they can contact me directly through there. But one thing I've found with my Zoom class, I don't know how much longer I'm going to hold it. For a while there, we had about 6 different states represented. We had a senator joining us. We've had all kinds of individuals that have joined, and it's been such a pleasure to teach them and for us to gather together, because there is an intention. There's something that people need to understand. There is an absolute intention by the powers that be to confuse the masses and to create chaos. That is an ideal catalyst for controlling individuals. So, what I like to do is just help make sense of human nature, help people to feel like they have a support system in place that can allow them to feel clear and not feel so coerced, and to do so in a way that makes that's just very logical. And so a lot of the class that I teach has to do with just mentoring them with everyday life skills. So whether you're in Canada like yourself, you've got some pretty serious things unfolding in Canada. America is not the America I knew a year and a half ago. But we also have to recognize that the powers that be, if we want to use that term, there were a lot of things that were put in place many, many years ago, before you and I were even born. And in order for the things to be happening the way they are now, the conditions had to be right. So the conditions have been set up for a lot of years, and now we are just being asked to counter that. At least that's what I feel I'm being asked to do now, to
Mhm.
counter that in a more direct manner, a more bold manner. Like I said, in my garden, I was kindly but chastisingly informed that, I have a lot of experience, you have a lot of experience, and we are being asked to step up now more than ever. And it's time to no longer have
Mhm.
excuses.
Absolutely. Well, I love that you're doing that, and I agree, and I do feel like our life experience prepares us for that kind of thing. So thank you for sharing that. And there's so much more we can talk about, but I want to be respectful of your time because I know you need to run. So people can get in touch with you, even if that doesn't keep running. You're definitely on social media supporting people and educating people on how to make sense of what's going on. Additionally, you're providing a lot of support for people with their family situations. And I have
Mm.
no doubt you're going to have people reaching out to you from our talk today, because I just hear so much of it. And you're right. Like the best target for them, sadly for us, is the family,
Mhm.
right? And so I love that you're available and really understand the dynamics. Plus, you have the NLP background, which we spoke about
Mhm.
before, and so you're able to see the mass hypnosis and the programming and the various tactics that are being used to divide and conquer and confuse and that kind of thing. So again, you're at wholefamilymentoring.com,
Yes,
and
and
people can also find you on Facebook. And
mhm. Yes, and my part of my offering, you were aware of this, but I'll just jump in and tell you that I would love to offer anyone listening a free session with me, an introductory session where they can share maybe some of the circumstances of their situation and they can find out if I'm a match for them. And so, usually a full session with me is about an hour, but these introductory ones are anywhere from 30 to 40 to maybe even up to an hour. But I would love to offer that free. And if people want to go to my website, one thing I found is coming from the trauma that I did, I've heard people tell me that my approach is much more effective than, say, the traditional counseling that they've gone to. And it's because I speak the language. I've lived it. And I can be assuring, but also be that motherly, strong voice of reason and support. And I don't coddle my clients. I don't like excuses, but I do like to help them to be aware of really how strong they can be if they have the right resources in place.
mm, that's amazing. Well, as we wrap up for today, there's so much we can talk about, but are there any parting thoughts that you wish to leave people with as we wrap up?
Yes, many years ago, I attended a conference which really changed my perspective about who I was. I felt this experience was specifically for me, what this person said at this conference. And he said, for some of you, your greatest mission, perhaps your only mission in life, is to absorb all the hate, anger, and pain. And from you go forth love. And I've realized that that's been part of my work, and I help other people to do the same. And so during this time when there's so much division and so much hate and so much being spewed that's not really very effective, let's step into that top 10% tier with grace and with conviction and with clarity and help one another to be clear, but let's not be combative one with another. If we expect heaven's power to help us make the difference, then we have to have his help. So let's behave in a way that's conducive to that as well.
Mm, that's a wonderful place to leave it. So thank you, Lori, for everything you shared today. I'm sure we'll do this again because there's so much more that we can go over. And thanks to all of you for being here today. We're looking forward to hearing your insights and what you're taking away and what you're putting into motion. So thanks again for being here. We'll see you again next time.